This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is about something quieter, something structural, something that only becomes visible once it's already too late to stop. What you are watching right now is not chaos. It is alignment. Pieces moving into place beneath the surface of daily politics. The system you live inside was built on an invisible agreement. You don't vote on it. You don't see it. But it decides what grows, what collapses, and what survives stress. That agreement is under strain. Not from protest, not from war. From overuse. If this feels distant, stay with me. Because the first thing systems do when they fail is look stable. If you're still watching, that's good. You're ahead of the curve. Because to understand what's coming next, we have to stop talking about people and start talking about what actually holds the system together. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. What actually controls the system now is not policy. It's not elections. It's not even power in the traditional sense. It's settlement. The ability to decide what medium counts when value moves from one place to another. When energy is priced, when debt is rolled, when risk is transferred quietly at scale for decades, one instrument sat at the center of all of it. So embedded, it stopped being noticed. So dominant, it felt permanent. That instrument didn't just facilitate trade. It disciplined behavior. It rewarded cooperation. And it punished deviation without firing a shot. But here's the shift most people missed. Control doesn't disappear all at once. It thins. When alternatives stop being theoretical and start being usable, authority doesn't collapse. It leaks. And leakage changes incentives before it changes headlines. This is why what looks like economic noise is actually signal. Why small procedural moves matter more than speeches. Why legality is less important than continuity. Because once the system discovers it can function without its old center, it never goes back. And that brings us to how this started slowly, quietly, and in plain sight. There was a moment when this system worked differently. Not better, just differently. Before, friction was a feature. Trade moved slower. Capital hesitated. Constraints forced coordination. Now, speed is the doctrine. What changed wasn't a single law or leader. It was normalization. Sanctions became routine. Emergency powers became reusable. Temporary measures stopped expiring. And each time the system absorbed the shock, it learned something dangerous. It could bend without breaking. Before, access was conditional. Now, access is contingent, revocable, transactional. That subtle shift rewired incentives globally. If you are a state, you don't wait to be excluded. You preempt it. You build redundancy. You design exits before you need them. This is the paradox. The more pressure applied, the more adaptive the periphery becomes. Slow change is the most destabilizing kind. Because no alarm sounds, no panic breaks out, until suddenly the old assumptions stop working. And when they stop working, it's never during a calm moment. That's when the first visible cracks appear. Not as collapse, but as a shock the system wasn't supposed to feel. And that shock is where we're going next. Then came the moment everyone was told not to worry about. A pause, a delay, a procedural shrug. A court didn't endorse the system's logic. It didn't fully reject it either. It just bought time. And time in systems like this is never neutral. Because while the legal argument stalled, the effects didn't. Prices moved. Supply chains recalculated. Firms hedged against uncertainty they could no longer model. This wasn't about whether the maneuver was justified. It was about what it signaled that rules could be stretched far enough to matter, that emergencies could be declared broadly enough to cover almost anything, that Congress could be bypassed, not permanently, just long enough. Long enough is all markets need. The shock wasn't the tariffs themselves. It was the realization that continuity had been replaced by improvisation. If you're thinking this feels technical, stay with me. Because this is the point where systems tip quietly. Watch what happens when uncertainty becomes policy. Watch who absorbs the cost. Watch who quietly exits. If this matters to you, keep going. Because the real story isn't the decision, it's what the system does next. Once it learns it can operate without permission, here's the part most people never see. The system doesn't respond to speeches. It responds to incentives. When uncertainty becomes permanent, behavior changes downstream. Not dramatically, precisely. If you are a producer, you reroute. If you are a buyer, you hedge. If you are a government, you reduce exposure. And exposure in this system means dependence on a single settlement layer. This is where the damage is absorbed unevenly. The benefits concentrate. The costs diffuse. Financial actors with optionality adapt first. They arbitrage volatility. They price in risk early. They exit quietly. Everyone else absorbs the lag. Higher input costs don't show up as policy failure. They show up as thinner margins. Delayed hiring, quiet layoffs. This is how a system hollows without announcing it. Because nothing here requires coordination. No conspiracy. Just rational actors responding to degraded trust. The mechanism is simple. When fewer participants need the system has to offer more to keep them. Higher yields, better terms, more concessions. That's not strength. That's dependency inversion. And once that inversion begins, the system doesn't collapse. It accelerates, which brings us to the next shock, faster, sharper, and harder to dismiss as noise. The second shock didn't arrive with debate. It arrived with data. A number moved, then another, then a pattern. Imports slowed, exports ticked up. And on the surface, it looked like correction, but look closer. What was leaving wasn't productivity. It was confidence. Gold moved first, quietly, steadily. Out the door. That's not growth. That's insurance. At the same time, the cost of bringing things in rose. Not because supply vanished, because the medium weakened. This is how inflation hides inside trade statistics. Not as excess demand, but as degraded purchasing power. Manufacturing didn't rebound. It contracted. Jobs disappeared without drama. 10 months in a row, no alarms. No emergency meetings, just attrition. This is the danger of reading outcomes without mechanisms. You mistake stress responses for recovery, and the system doesn't correct this by itself. It compounds because while this was happening domestically, something else was aligning externally. Not loudly, not all at once, but deliberately. And once those external rails lock in, reversal becomes optional. That's the moment we're approaching now. This is the part where it reaches you, not abstractly, not eventually, now. Because when systems adjust under stress, they don't ask for permission. They rebalance through households, through your grocery bill, your rent renewal, your job posting that never quite appears. You are told this is volatility, that it will settle, that markets are resilient. But resilience for the system often means fragility for the individual. When capital gets cautious, it doesn't stop moving. It moves away from risk. And in this economy, labor is the risk, wages lag, hours thin, security becomes conditional. And here's the quiet part. You're not meant to connect this to trade law or settlement currency or executive maneuvering. You're meant to feel it as personal failure, as bad luck, as noise. If any of this feels familiar, stay with me. Share this if you need someone else to see it too. Because what happens next doesn't just affect balance sheets. It changes how countries relate to each other. And once that line is crossed, there's no such thing as a local problem anymore. What started as adjustment doesn't stay contained. It never does. Because once trust degrades at the center, the edges move first. Quietly, pragmatically, trade blocs begin settling among themselves, not as protest, as insurance. Payment systems interlock. Digital rails get tested. pilot programs stop calling themselves pilots. None of this requires agreement with each other. Just agreement on one thing. Redundancy beats loyalty. Energy trades reroute. Settlement experiments become routine. Discounts replace premiums, and suddenly, transactions that once had to pass through a single channel don't. This is not a revolt against a country. It's a hedge against unpredictability. And the danger here isn't speed, it's permanence. Because once a transaction clears successfully outside the old system, the psychological barrier breaks. From that point on, using the old path becomes a choice, not a necessity. That's when power shifts without announcement. And that's why what looks like global noise is actually convergence. Multiple actors, different motives, same direction, which brings us to the moment everyone is trying not to name. The future point where these trends stop coexisting and start competing. From here, there are only three paths, not outcomes, paths. The first is adjustment, quiet recalibration, partial restraint, a slow rebuilding of trust through predictability, not dominance. This path is dull, technocratic, politically unrewarding, and that's why it's fragile. The second is erosion. The system keeps functioning, but at a cost. Higher yields, thinner margins, more volatility normalized as background noise. Nothing breaks, but nothing fully works either. This is the long decline version, comfortable enough to tolerate, expensive enough to matter. The third path is rupture, a trigger event, a failed auction, a mispriced risk, a moment where liquidity hesitates when it's expected to flood in, not collapse, revelation. And here's the key point. None of these paths require malice or conspiracy or even intention. They emerge from momentum, from decisions already made, from trust already spent, from systems that were never designed to reverse quickly. Which path unfolds doesn't depend on rhetoric, it depends on timing. And timing, right now, is tightening. Because the next phase isn't about theory anymore. It's about what happens when belief meets a deadline. And that's where this story ends, without ending. So this is where we stop pretending this is someone else's problem. Not because it's resolved, but because it isn't. Systems don't announce their breaking points. They reveal them in hindsight. What matters now is not outrage, not loyalty, not denial. It's attention, because the danger here isn't collapse, it's normalization, a slow acceptance that things feel tighter, riskier, less stable, and that this is just how it is now. That's how systemic failure survives scrutiny, by becoming familiar. If demand quietly drains from the center, if alternatives keep clearing without friction, if trust keeps thinning instead of snapping, then the question won't be, when did this happen? It will be, why didn't we see it? This story doesn't end tonight. It doesn't end this year. And it doesn't end cleanly. It continues in court decisions no one reads, in trade data no one connects, in payment rails most people don't know exist. If you want to understand what comes next, don't look for explosions. Look for silence. Stay with this. Follow the trail. Because the next chapter won't be louder. It will be harder to ignore